and welcome to the ROCKATX online worship experience. You're getting ready to experience God on another level. Whatever you're seeking from God for your life is available for you as you praise, hear the word, and transform your situation. While you're worshiping with us, feel free to interact with our online ministers in the chat and share this broadcast with your friends and family so they can join you online. Also, make sure you subscribe and follow the ROCKATX on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram to stay connected to all the Rock is doing. Now, shake off the worries of the week and get ready to give God some praise. Service will begin soon.
Paul has to talk to these believers, and all they've known was Judaism, the entirety of their life. And all they've known was, as Jews, waiting for the day of the Lord and the kingdom to be established. And so now Paul comes and he stands, and remember, he's standing in front of them. When they're looking at him, they're seeing Saul. They're seeing Saul, the man who's persecuted the church historically. And so you can imagine a little bit of unbelief and a little bit of confusion, because it was like, you've been trying to kill us for all these years. And now you standing up in front of us, and you the guest speaker. Can you imagine the confusion there? And then there were some that were like, okay, what are we doing? Why? Because weren't we in the synagogue on Saturday? Why are we now in this house and in this meeting still talking and everything else? What is really going on? And so Paul has this task of trying to tie them from where they were to where they are, and showing them how their history relates to his message. And Paul has to now break down for them, wait a minute, I know that you think about Abraham and you think about Israel, and we're not denying that we're still Abraham's sons, and we're not throwing away our history. In fact, now I have the task of tying in your history with your reality. And so he stands in Acts 13, and he's motioning with his hand. He's speaking passionately, because he has to get them to get the big idea. And so he's trying to make sure y'all understand it, y'all get it. So he breaks down, men of Israel, and he talks to them about, listen, from Egypt to David. And he walks them through the systematic journey that they went through from Egypt to David. Why? Because they all knew Egypt, and they all were very familiar with the history. But then he ties this Davidic history now to Jesus. And he links it for the first time, so they say, okay, now we understand. We're not throwing away our past. We're not abandoning our past, but we're actually tying it in. And this was God. This is not a different plan from God. This was always his plan. Am I making sense? And so he connects this for them. And it's important, because when you look at your life and when we look at our lives, it's important that we understand that there are stages of our life, and God is always in a process of development. So he has to show them that God was not, we're not separating from the desert. The desert was part of the development. We're not separating from the judges. The judges were part of the development. We're not separating from Saul. Saul was a part of the development. And so it's important that we understand as believers the idea of spiritual development. What's interesting is the church is the only space that we don't have metrics and measurements that help define where we are. You literally just get saved and you just be saved. You just come to church and you just at church. So if I come to Sunday night service, why do I come to, what am I growing toward? What am I doing? Do I have a goal this year? Because, we all say, and I give the general, I want to know God. But how do you measure How do you measure your spiritual development? How do you measure your growth? Or I'm in a process of everlasting school, everlasting church. You know, or there places where I can say, man, I need to really work on that. You know, I'm not good at that. And so now I can see I need to dedicate this year to working on that piece. Am I making sense? You know, so Paul is talking to them, and he clarifies how God was developing Israel and developing his plan over time. So on tonight, I want you to look at this idea. We want to open up this idea of what does spiritual development look like? Because do we measure our growth by church attendance? Do we measure our growth by levels of support? Do we measure our growth by activity levels? Do we measure our growth by giving? See, think about it. Even as a believer today in the kingdom of God, we don't know how to evaluate ourselves. And what happens is when you don't know how to evaluate yourself, what you usually do is start competing internally. You start competing subconsciously for approval from someone who you delve as spiritual. So you start saying, well, I just want the pastor to know. I just want the elder to know. I want somebody to know what I'm doing. Why? Because I don't know how to evaluate myself. And so the only thing I can do is look at them. And if they say I'm doing good or doing better, then I guess I'm doing good, doing better. But I really don't know. Even in school, you got to have grades. In sports, you got to have scores. And I'm making sense. There's got to be somebody that keeps the stats that lets you know how you're doing and can look at you periodically and say, okay, better at this, better at that, better at this. You've improved. You've gotten taller. Think about it. You know you've gotten taller. You know some of us know we've gotten heavier. Why do we take yearly physical evaluations? Because we want to know. We want to look at our blood work and see, is my A1C getting better or worse? How is my heart? How is my lungs? How is my cholesterol? So everywhere in life we have metrics, but in the church we have none. So on tonight, I want to help you just to identify a few metrics for us to think about so that we can look at ourselves, or you can look at yourself, and you don't need anybody to evaluate you, but you can say, man, you know what? I can look at these things and say to myself, whoa, I'm not doing well. And it's making sense. And I thought, what better person to look at when it comes to evaluating ourselves than David? Why David, Dr. Moody? Because in Acts, Paul says that David was a man after God's own heart. And he was such a man, and he had such a heart for God, that God said, from his seed, I'm going to bring forth the Messiah. So if I want to use somebody to look at, he will be probably somebody that's pretty good to look at. Am I making sense? Are y'all with me? So I want to look at David as a model for spiritual development. And I want to walk through some stages of his life so that we can now look at each one of ourselves and say, man, I'm in stage 1. Or man, I'm in stage 4. Am I making sense? And I also want to not just look at the stage, but I want to look at the key struggles in every stage. So that I can look and see not just where I am, but what I need to be looking for. And lastly, I want to provide a remedy for each struggle in each stage. Can we do that? Can we do that? All right. So somebody say stage 1. So when we look at spiritual development, you can actually look at David's life, and you can put David's life into specific stages, and you can identify these stages. You can write these things down, and you can always have a metric or a measurement that is not subjective. That is not just you looking at you saying, I think I'm doing pretty good. Or you looking at you and saying, I think I'm doing terrible. So stage 1. Stage 1 is this. Stage 1 of spiritual development is this. Self-sacrificial service. Stage one, somebody say, well, I'm not doing well. Stage one. Why do you say this, Dr. Moody? Look at 1 Samuel chapter 16. We're going to look at verses 11 through 13, just here. We're going to start here. Stage one, self-sacrificial service. Stage one. It says this. Now Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? Are these all the guys you got? Are these all the sons you got? Then he said, there remains yet the youngest. And he is there keeping the sheep. Stage one in your spiritual development is, do you have the ability to serve in obscurity? Do you have the ability to do what you've been asked to do, even when no one around you recognizes you? David was literally the youngest. Samuel comes to Jesse's house, and he is looking for the son to anoint. Jesse brings all of his sons in besides David. Now, you got to notice this. So David is out in the field tending the sheep, and he looks across the field, and he notices there's something going on at the house. And he notices that there's something big happening. It's just like I see the. It looks like a crowd, and the prophet comes walking up there. Everybody knows the prophet Samuel. Samuel's coming to the house, and now my dad's there, and then you see your brothers coming, and there are, you see one or two coming, and then next thing you know, if you're like me, you count like one. That's him. 6 brothers come, and they all show up. I believe it was 7 brothers come, and they all show up, and then they go into the house. Nobody calls you. Nobody mentions your name. There's no invitation. And remember, this was the prophet coming to anoint someone. So if I can imagine in my mind, there was probably a praise service. And you're sitting there and you hear the music playing in the background. You're like, sounds like having worship in there. And then prayer. Come on, Lord. Show us, Lord. Do it, Lord. Give us your sign, Lord. And then to have each one of the brothers come up. So it's got to be exciting. Like, is this the one? Is this the one? Oh. And to hear that and to see that and experience that the number of times while nobody's calling you. And David, notice, I told you this is a measurement of what stage you're on, right? Because some of you say, I would have left. I would have walked away. Now, Samuel tries to pour the oil on all these sons, and it doesn't pour, it doesn't flow. And because the oil was going to flow when the one that was supposed to be anointed was there. And literally, he's like, is there somebody else? So now the meeting is coming to a close, and they found no future king. Now it's prophesied that there's going to be the future king that's going to be chosen there. So you can imagine that there's a ruckus around the house. But after a while, people are like, man, ain't nothing happening. And David he watched people come and go. And then it says, and Samuel said to Jesse, is there another body? Is there somebody else? And he said, well, yeah, the youngest is, where is he? He's out there. Listen, serving in obscurity. See, you got to ask yourself, do I have the ability to serve while being unrecognized? And to serve, listen, while being unappreciated. This is stage one. When nobody tells you thank you, how do you feel? when nobody comes to you and recognizes you, when you don't get the certificate for servant of the year. Look at somebody say stage one. Stage one. And so Samuel said to Jesse, well, bring him. For, listen, he says, we will not sit down until he comes, which lets you know the energy in the room was high because they were expecting to anoint a king. And the prophet says, we ain't sitting down till he comes. So he sent and brought him in. Now, the Bible is so funny because it doesn't say he was majestic and that he was a future king. It said, now he was ruddy. That means he was a small little fellow. And so that's what the Bible got to say about you. That's the first description, that you ruddy. But he's ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for this is the one. And then Samuel takes the oil and literally anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So now, listen, you are now the new anointed king. And your next assignment is go back and serve in obscurity. Stage one. Just because you are anointed don't mean you're out in front. Just because you gifted, listen. So God recognizes you and people don't. You've got to learn how to serve in obscurity. Am I making sense? The second thing you got to learn to do is this. You got to learn not how to serve, obediently. Why? Because now you know you're the anointed one, right? Now, can you imagine you know you're the next king? And now you're out and you're tending sheep. Now, in chapter 16, verse 18, it says this. Then the servant said, look, I've seen a son of Jesse, and the Bethlehemite, and who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person. And the Lord is with him. So now you're anointed. But you with your anointed self are out in the field playing the guitar by yourself. Keeping sheep all day. And people walk by you and they say, man, that boy good. While you're keeping sheep. Nobody says, thou art the man of God. Now, but the text is interesting here because it says this, and the Lord is with him. Now, wait a minute. The Lord is with you while you're serving in obscurity. You got to be careful because your idea of what it means to be anointed is skewed. Because he has been anointed the future king. The Lord is with him and he is busy keeping sheep. Saying, I wrote a new song for y'all. Man, I was thinking the other day. And his only audience are sheep. Singing and praising God and keeping sheep and anointed. How do you see being anointed? How do you view being anointed? Stage one says you're in self-sacrificial service. You just do it because you're asked. Now, but I want you to know that even in this stage one, God often adds insult to injury. Because notice, he had been anointed to be what? The future king, right? So now, what happens? Saul calls him, and he calls him to serve him. So you are the future king. Now you got to go in and serve the current king. You got to know God is with you while serving somebody who God has left. Well, it's quiet in here now. That means you got to learn how to serve obediently. It says this, verse 20. So Jesse took a donkey. No, I love this verse 19. Look at 19. Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. Which means Saul didn't even ask David. And Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, skin, and wine, and the goat, and sent them by his son David. Go take these to Saul.
Thank you for worshiping with us today. If you're in need of prayer or someone to talk to, our online ministers are available for you right now in the chat. And we invite you to join us again for our extraordinary worship services every Sunday at 10:30 a.m., Sunday at 4 p.m., and Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Central, where Dr. Moody teaches how to understand the Bible and you can get your biblical questions answered. We look forward to connecting with you and ask that you subscribe to The Rock ATX on YouTube and follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay connected to all The Rock is doing. Also, you can connect with us through our website at TheROCKATX.org. Again, thank you for worshiping with us, and be blessed.